If you're an open-world RPG player, you've probably gotten this message before. The one that goes something like, turn around, you've reached the end, you're gonna clip through the world soon. It can be so immersion-breaking and a bit disappointing to say the least. As a game designer myself, I'm always curious what sits just on the other side of these invisible barriers, if anything is there at all. So I decided to literally push the boundaries of my favorite game, The Witcher 3. Before you ask, yes, I really did run around the outside of every single map in the game. Yes, it took a while, but no, I have no regrets. There were a lot of expected things on the outside, like empty space of course, but to my surprise there were actually quite a few interesting locations and leftover details sitting just outside the player's access. So today, join me as I take you along on a trip beyond what CDPR intended, without the use of any mods outside of one debug menu command. We'll go in order according to the story to keep at least something about this video somewhat normal. So without further ado, let the walking / swimming / sailing begin. Starting in White Orchard, our intended route is to make a clockwise circle of the border, beginning near the sawmill. As we set out towards the mysterious village in the distance, the game lets us know we've gone far enough. As I've shown in previous videos, we can get around this easily by switching the playable character to Ciri, as she does not have the barrier script attached to her character. We're now free to walk past that message and go wherever we like. I should say wherever there is solid ground. Clipping through the map is the one problem we'll encounter in some areas, so mapping a route is key. Speaking of that village from earlier, we can take the camera there using photo mode to get a closer look. It turns out to be a low poly model of a city. In a way, the layout somewhat reminds me of a much smaller Novigrad. Devs often use models like this to fool the player into thinking there's more outside of the playable area, while also saving on system resources. Behind the city, we can see a vast body of water, which you'll find is quite common in Witcher maps. Back on the ground, we turn right and start our long trek. We encountered this marsh area just west of the Nilfgaardian outpost. If I didn't know any better, I'd think this was Velen. We swim across the river and get a better look at where we are. In this west corner, there is very little solid ground to work with, so navigation gets a bit tricky. Just beyond the trees, we can see there is actually a lake area feeding into the ocean that looks surprisingly well detailed for somewhere you'd never normally see. We can also find the other side of this bridge that doesn't have any collision. It's refreshing to see some of these very familiar areas from a new perspective. We run through the dense forest for a while before finding a random path that seemingly leads nowhere. Using photo mode, we see it originates near the windmill before trailing off. Most likely, the devs did this once again to give the illusion of a larger world. We are greeted by a ghoul, which tells us we've accidentally made it back in bounds. This place of power sits extremely close to the world border, which I didn't think about until now. Once beyond the border again, we run into this collection of tents holding various army equipment and some dead livestock. There are also a few cots and an empty chest. My only guess as to what this is for is to perhaps add some detail in case the player is able to see this area from a point in bounds. It sits just behind the windmill though, so I'm not too sure it's visible at all. Let me know what you think this could be for. After finding ourselves at the gate on Cackler Bridge, I wanted to point out an area that is technically in bounds, but is one that I still feel many players miss. Here we can find a deserted battlefield, much resembling the one from the opening cutscene to the game. This is an excellent example of environmental storytelling, as just by stumbling across the area, players can learn a great deal about the history and previous events in White Orchard prior to the game. We head back out of bounds and find yet another path. Upon inspection, this one is similar to the last, but actually leads from the battlefield to this area far away from the main map. You'll notice there is still a surprising amount of terrain detail even in areas that are far out like this. Heading south past the ransacked village now, we find ourselves at this beach. We cross the river and then run into a herd of deer. Even the out-of-bounds areas feel alive. Just south of the abandoned village, we come across this bandit camp that is once again right on the edge of the playable map. After running for a little while longer and falling through the map a few more times, we eventually spot the low poly city from earlier, meaning we have successfully completed our route. It's time to move on to the much larger, later game maps with more to see. Before starting the walking simulator back up, I did briefly want to talk about Vizima. Though there is technically no map border to break past, I have always wondered what lies beyond the castle. So, using photo mode, we exit through the top of the garden to find out just that. Here, after checking out a low poly bird, we can get a cross section of the map and see just how little space it takes up. We can also see that there's actually a surprising amount of terrain in the area, including this ominous misty pit. The most interesting part, however, lies just over here where there is a raised area with a portion of the ground being bloodstained. There's also a cutout in the terrain, possibly for a structure, and various details such as trees and plants that seem unnecessary given they will never be seen. Perhaps this area was for cut content. Back to the castle now, one of my favorite details is that in this room where Ambassador Varatra is, the ceiling is actually made of one giant stretched out rug. I have no idea why, but it is hilarious. We find that a lot of the rooms look very different from this angle. Finally, looking under the map, we can see there are some things left over, such as this chest and a few ladders that clip into the ground from above. We can also finally confirm that the door at the bottom of that staircase does in fact go nowhere. There are also some various props and a basic cube hanging out down here. I was actually pleasantly surprised by how much there was to find in the game's smallest map. Maybe not quite as excited as this guy though. Okay, time for the big one. Our route through the Velen/Novigrad area takes us from the Nilfgaardian garrison in a large box-like counterclockwise loop. Taking a look at the garrison first, we of course find that the gate is closed tight. This is no problem though, as we can use these tents to hop the spiked wall. Here we're hit with the map border message, so after switching to Siri, we can explore the encampment freely. There are so many more tents than I expected, and they deload as we get close, once again due to how the game optimizes resources. Using photo mode, we can see that the tents continue all the way up this hill, ending near this watchtower at the top. The encampment is much bigger than I had ever thought, and I'm glad we could see it in its entirety. To get back out of the garrison, we can use these exposed logs to hop over the wall once more. Sitting at the very bottom right of the map now, we can start our main route by heading north. Immediately we find yet another random path that leads somewhere far off into the wilderness. By running right on the outside of the map, we can get this beautiful view of the riverside, which I never thought I'd say about Velen. To stay out of bounds, we have to swim across this large lake. After attempting to do so, we find out that walking isn't really an option at the moment. I also almost fell off the map while underwater somehow. So, I invoke my title of Boat Goat once more to summon something a bit faster to get us across. On our way though, I notice a strange formation in the cliffside just ahead. By taking a closer look, we can see that this is actually the Temple of Lilvani, also known as the place where you meet Olgerd and Gaunter to end Hearts of Stone. By looking out, we can see ourselves from this vantage point, which is pretty cool. Just a bit further, we find some actual solid land to walk on, but it is here that I notice something interesting. On the map, there's a circular lake far outside the playable area. By taking the camera over, to my surprise, it's actually here. Interesting detail considering the player would never know it exists. Continuing on, we find ourselves in this mountainous region. Similar to White Orchard, this area is tricky to navigate and has very little solid ground. Even more surprising is that this area also has enemies, as I was approached by this group of neckers just a few steps further. We once again accidentally find ourselves back in bounds near Est-Taillere, and after dealing with some ghouls and this Ericus I forgot existed, we find ourselves on the outside of the Dead White Woods. The lighting gets a bit more unsettling here as we progress. Just ahead, we pass by the Kilkerran ruins and are interrupted by some arachnomorphs. Just about the most unpleasant surprise possible. To make things all the more better, there are even more neckers ahead. But after dealing with all that, we can descend this hill to find ourselves near the windmill at the top right of the map. Running through this village is a large river. And as I found in a previous video, right after this lake that feeds the river, you can find the 2 mansions used for the Painted World segment of Scenes from a Marriage. To see my full return and exploration of these 2 areas, click the button above or check the description. North of Brunwick now, we run through some more forest, past a couple of bandit camps, and get randomly dive bombed by a wyvern. I was not expecting to do this much combat during this video. We're now north of the isolated hut in this marsh-like area. After heading uphill for a while, we can see that we are steadily approaching Novigrad from the north. Sure enough, after coming down, we can see the Temple of Eternal Fire living up to its name. Once we cross the water, we can see a location that looks really familiar. It turns out to be the shipwreck that occurs during Hearts of Stone. I must have run from the mage in this playthrough. After a while, they'll eventually build an encampment, as you can see. Well, I don't feel like fighting him now either. Speaking of things I don't feel like dealing with, we also see this lighthouse that is crawling with drowned dead. We're now on this island just to the north of Novigrad. I was curious to see if the map was accurate as far as the other islands to the north of us. And after checking, the other 2 islands that were shown on the map turn out to be here in game as well. We have a lot of water ahead of us, so I do what I do best. Then we set out in the Novigrad Bay. We first come across this boat sailing very slowly in the opposite direction. We can see that again it is a low poly model used to sell the illusion of a busy port outside the city. There are actually quite a few of these boats periodically in the area. As per usual, I've talked a lot already, so let's take a moment to relax and take in the sunset at sea while we sail for southern Velen. About halfway to our final destination, I noticed this island that I've never seen before. When taking a closer look, it appears as though a griffin has made its nest here. I don't think I've ever done the contract associated with this area. I guess I'll have to go back and check that out sometime. There is a large cluster of islands and land at the south of the map, but sadly, upon looking closer, many of them are bare and have no collision. Just to the southwest of Bald Mountain, we finally complete our sailing and set out on foot again. We run through the dark woods and scale the side of the hill next to the destroyed bastion. The forest in this area seems to go on forever, which is due to the surprisingly dense environment and some very clever trickery by CDPR. A good example is this collection of trees that are angled in this way to appear more layered from the player's perspective. The sun was starting to rise as we approached the last segment of our Velen route. Just like that, we ran back into the Nilfgaardian garrison area. We can even see Bald Mountain from here. Another map is complete. Up next, it's time for what was perhaps the trickiest map to explore. Our route through Skellige ideally starts at the Tower of the Falcon in the west and goes clockwise around all the isles. So, starting at the abandoned village, we make our way down to the ocean and hop in a boat to take the same route that Geralt does when starting the Isle of Mists. A quick fact on that, by the way, because the Isle of Mist is an entirely separate map from Skellige, it is not possible to return to it without modding the game. I know, I was a bit surprised too when I found out it wasn't actually a part of Skellige. The game actually lets us go a pretty good distance before a swarm of sirens and the usual message stops us from progressing. Ciri, as usual, sails past this no problem though. We first go to check out this longboat just ahead, and like the one in Novigrad, it is slowly moving to give the illusion of it actually being a manned ship. This boat, however, is not low poly, and is actually the same model as the boats that are sunk in the last Wish Quest. Skellige has tons of unique islands just sitting outside the playable area. It's one of those details that adds to the immersion so well that you never even notice it until it's pointed out. Okay, so like I said at the start of the video, yes, I really did sit and sail the perimeter of Skellige for a few hours looking for unique details. And I'm going to be the first to say, compared to the other maps, there really isn't all that much there. Skellige's main content lies on dry land, and those isles don't have world borders. So instead of just moving on, I decided to show some things that are often forgotten or missed by players. First up is this island just to the north of where you find the Djinn with Yennefer. But before you get there, you can see this tiny rock with one single drowner guarding some treasure. I totally forgot about this. At the island though, there is a ship dock nearby being swarmed by sirens. On shore, there is actually a polar bear, something you don't see that often when exploring normally, at least I don't. If we scale the cliffside to the highest point, we can get a really nice view of a rather uncommon area of Skellige. The last thing I'll mention is rather well known, but definitely worth including anyway. On an island southwest of the Tower of the Falcon, we can find yet another ship and a rather lifeless area. But after hiking to the top of the mountain, we can find this platform with a dead bear and a shrine of shields and other weapons, as if it was laid here as sacrifice. As far as I know, there is no explanation of what this is or why it is here, and in the chest beside it, there is some decent loot as well. Though this section was a bit unconventional, to say the least, I hope you still got something out of it, or at least enjoyed the Skellige music. It's now time for the map I was the most excited to explore. I'll be honest, I am still confused by the Kaer Morhen map even after exploring the whole thing. Unlike any of the other maps in the game, about 80% of Kaer Morhen's out of bounds areas are blocked by invisible barriers. I'm so curious as to why. The reason I say 80 and not 100% is because you can still get out of bounds easily at the Bastion location. Not far beyond its walls, the boundary message pops up, which I will add is super quick when you think about how close you are to a signpost. Switching to Ciri, we can head north up this cliffside where we are immediately met with stretched and low poly textures. After climbing for a while, we can see the reason we are up here, as we start to take in this incredible view of the valley and the surrounding mountains. We can actually continue even further up using timed rolls and momentum to get this final result. To this day, I consider this to be one of my favorite views in the entire game. Here's where things get interesting though. As I was descending, very carefully, down the cliffside, I looked across to that gigantic mountain behind the main fortress. As I said before, there are invisible barriers literally everywhere on this map. But what if we could find a way to get to the top? As a preliminary test, I used photo mode to examine the peak, and to my surprise, the ground was solid, meaning a character can stand on it without falling into the void. This created what could be a great discovery, or the biggest waste of time in channel history. So obviously I tried it. I want to keep the full climb in here in case you guys want to see the route, so I apologize in advance for all the fast forwarding. I started at the damaged wall at the main fortress and first scaled the side of the much smaller mountain before the tallest one. Once past it, you can see just how high up we have to go. Next, we cross the valley and start the ascent up the not-so-steep portion of the mountain. It was slow, but steady. Using the portions of grass makes it much easier. We can now take a look back and see how much altitude we have already gained. There's still a lot of grass in this next section, so it's also pretty easy. Here you can see we are almost going straight upwards at a full 90 degrees. They need to start calling Ciri Billy Goat instead of Swallow at this point. Once near the top, progress slowed down considerably, and I could tell carpal tunnel was in my future. The view was already incredible, but we still had a long ways to go. Things actually began to ease up towards the top, and it didn't feel like there was much of a fall risk. When I finally made it, the view was even better than I thought. It's so weird to look almost straight down at the main fortress. I spent quite a while taking screenshots and then swapped back to Geralt to meditate and see it at night as well. Being up this high made me wonder though, what is beyond all the mountains in this map? Well, by using photo mode, the answer appears to be more mountains. Seriously, CDPR did not cut any corners here. And every single inch of this place is fully rendered, sculpted mountain terrain. No skybox or funny tricks, just great map design. This experience moved Kaer Morhen up my favorites list for sure. At last, we're moving on to the final map in the game. The one that many have said could have been a whole game all on its own. The route around Toussaint is an interesting one to say the least, beginning at the Artak Palace ruins and then heading counterclockwise across many types of terrain. So doing just that, we sprinted to the western border, where we were met with the world boundary message just before this river. As you can probably guess, Ciri swims across no problem. Immediately we see something strange, as there is a broken wagon with fallen soldiers surrounding it as if it was attacked. Even further east of this though is something even stranger. On the same path as the cart, tucked out of bounds, is this fully modeled vineyard. Similar to some other decorated buildings in the game, it has no interiors and is only fully viewable from certain angles. I cannot recall ever going here during any of the quests, but if you know more about this place, please leave a comment. Heading beyond the vineyard, we end up in this wide field of flowers with a great view of the mountains and Toussaint skyline. Northeast of Fox Hollow, we can find this small waterfall, which just reminds me that water in Toussaint just looks so much better than everywhere else in the game. Beyond that, we find the first of many random paths in Toussaint, this one being in the far west. It leads far off the map towards the mountain range. And speaking of mountain ranges, I know I just climbed one, but I can't help but be curious if this peak overlooking the entire region is also possible to go up. Sure enough, the camera found that it too has solid ground at the top. So, if you want to see me climb it next, let me know and I'll add it to my ever-growing list of random things to do in the game. After frolicking in some more flowers, we find this pleasant stream to follow for a while. Toussaint's out of bounds area literally feels like you're still in the main map. Everything is decorated so nicely and feels so alive. Also, unlike the other maps, you would have to try really hard to clip through the world in Toussaint. In the southern region of the map now, I was progressing like normal until I saw a house in the distance completely pop out of existence. Using photo mode, I was able to find it once again and confirm I'm not crazy. This low poly house is used as a background detail and once again is one of those things that adds to the immersion very subtly until you notice it. There's also a path that strangely leads right by the house and into the main playable map, which makes me wonder if this area was meant to have more to it at one point. At the southeastern corner now, we cross the river and begin our return north as we see the map struggle to handle this new approach. We also see this interesting rock formation, which, once climbing up, gives us this pretty nice overlook of eastern Beauclair. Once climbing down carefully as always, we arrive at this spot near the river bend where we find yet another path that this time has NPCs walking along it. I took a closer look and found, surprise surprise, that they are walking to nowhere. When they reach a certain point, they simply just turn around and stroll back into the city. I never even thought about where NPCs go until now, but this seems like a tough life. Just over the hill, we are once again attacked by a random Draconid. How did that happen twice in one video? We eventually find ourselves back at the northern part of the map and looking ahead at the Danamebi temple ruins. The ruins across the river are usually inaccessible, so let's take a look and see what they're like. We swim across and run through these really creepy woods and find ourselves under the ruins? Turns out these ruins are not a location at all. They're simply a model with no collision tucked into the woods as a world building detail. The trees are even clipping through the middle. As you may know from one of my previous videos, to the north of this location is another path, and by following it and then heading over the nearby hill, you will actually end up back at the Land of a Thousand Fables from the Beyond Hill and Dale quest. Check out my full video exploring the location before and after the quest above or in the description. Though we may have completed our loop now, it would be stupid not to mention perhaps the most famous out-of-bounds secret. Past the mountains in the far southwest is a photo of the CDPR dev team that worked on The Witcher 3. By opening the map, you can see it doesn't even register because of how far out it is. What? Oh, this monstrosity? Yeah, apparently if you switch characters too many times, you can get Geary or Geralt or whatever you want to name this abomination. On that strange note, that was our last map to explore. Now I'm the one who needs to get some steps in. As always, thank you all so much for watching this video. This video idea was a bit of a strange one, but it was definitely a topic that I'd always been curious about and wanted to see for myself. If you enjoyed or want to see more, please consider liking and subscribing as it really helps out the channel. I also have a Discord server for the community where you can get all the information firsthand and chat with fellow RPG fans. You can join via the link in the description or on the channel page. I have a lot of big plans for the channel in the near future, so be sure to stay tuned if you want more like this. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all soon.